Hi, I'm Chandra, Awakened Inferno, and this deck is straight fire, pun intended. Before this deck, I was only sort of friends with these other Boros identity planeswalkers, but now I could say we're best of friends. You might even say we're super friends. It's Boros Superfriends from the Commander's Brew. Check it out.
Hey, this is the Commander's Brew take on a Boros Superfriends deck. I'm going to bring you the story of this deck. Instead of just telling you all the good cards that kind of go together, I find that when we make decks around here, some cards influence other cards, and different choices you make in one area influence the choices you make in another area. This leads to a more synergistic deck most of the time, and frankly, way more fun to play. So let me get to you this week's episode of Deck Tales. Okay, Boros Superfriends. Who's the commander? Makes sense. Mila, Crafty Companion. Legendary creature, Fox. 1 white for a 2/3, and Mila has the advantage of being card draw. If any of our permanents are targeted by spells or abilities, we get to draw a card. And whenever people attack us or planeswalkers we control, we get to add a loyalty counter to all of our planeswalkers. Naturally, we're going to want to load it up with planeswalkers, and we're going to want people to attack us. How do we get it done? So obviously, if we're a planeswalker deck, we're going to have a bunch of planeswalkers. So the Chain Veil is going to be a great add to something like this. Gets a little bit pricey, and it's kind of pricey both in mana value and in how much it costs in real life. It's a $15 card in real life these days as of this recording. It lets you use your loyalty abilities an additional time, but it costs you 4 mana to do so. If I've got 3 or 4 planeswalkers on the battlefield, that seems like a fair deal, but if I'm down to 1, maybe 2, it's not sounding like such a great deal. Especially if we've got cards like Lithoform Engine. This one, maybe a $10 card. Also costs 4 to cast, but we're mainly interested in the first ability, 2 to copy an activated ability. Planeswalker abilities are activated abilities, so the Lithoform Engine can copy them. Those other 2 abilities are not bad either. We're never going to copy the permanent that is a planeswalker because legendary rule, they can't both exist. But there's a couple things in this deck where we wouldn't mind a second copy of, so I'll bring those up when we see them. 2 mana per loyalty ability, not too bad. And Rings of Brighthearth is a mana cheaper to come down onto the battlefield and does the same thing for 2 mana but without any other options. Copy an activated ability for 2. I'm happy to get an extra planeswalker ability for 2 mana. So if you want to save some money on this deck, maybe the Chain Veil's out. Frankly, I think it's a little bit too expensive for this type of deck. Now we got to think about mana, how we're going to ramp, how we're going to get stuff done. It is a Boros deck, so we don't have a lot of access to actual mana ramp in terms of lands, but we are running Duretti Scrap Savant, and one of his loyalty abilities is to chuck an artifact in the graveyard to get an artifact back from the graveyard into the battlefield. So naturally, we're going to be able to tune our mana base to take advantage of artifacts that love to go to the graveyard. Your Mind Stones, your Renegade Maps, your Dreamstone Hedron, stuff like that. I wish I could say we had a few planeswalkers that made artifact creature tokens, but truly, there aren't any in Boros that lets you actually make artifacts for Duretti to scrap. Karn, Scion of Urza, colorless, so it goes in any deck you want, actually makes artifacts. The problem with those artifacts is you kind of want to keep them around as big, beefy blockers to protect your team of planeswalkers. It's not the kind of card you want to be sacrificing too often, otherwise he's not doing much. But that's what we have to work with. Speaking of ramp, Honor-Worn Shaku is perfect for this deck. They printed this card a long time ago, and it only keeps getting better because we have more and more planeswalkers. A must-have in any Super Friends deck. It's a 3-mana mana rock, taps for 1 colorless, but it untaps with tapping any legendary permanent. It doesn't have to be a creature. Planeswalkers can be tapped to untap Honor-Worn Shaku and then give you another mana. So planeswalkers don't care if they're tapped or not. They don't affect the functionality at all. Legendary equipment, legendary artifacts that just do things that don't require tapping also work excellent with Honor-Worn Shaku. This thing can give us a bunch of mana or give us an immediate discount on a planeswalker we've played. I shouldn't say discount, I should say a rebate. If we cast a 4-mana planeswalker, we can immediately tap it to untap Shaku to get 1 more mana for another play that turn, or an instant on someone else's turn. Fantastic mana ramp. And I've got to talk about an MVP for this deck. It's Chandra's Regulator. This is a spicy artifact that goes excellent with all the Chandras. Even if you don't have a Chandra, you can use it to loot away a mountain or a red card to get something you do want. But if we do have a Chandra out, this works better than a Lithoform engine. It doesn't tap, and all we have to do is pay 1. And might I add, this itself is a legendary artifact. So if we have the Honor-Worn Shaku, we can tap the Regulator to untap Shaku to pay for the 1 that the Regulator requires anyway. So it sort of pays for itself with Honor-Worn Shaku. And we've got a couple of Chandras that function as ramp too. Chandra, Torch of Defiance. She's got a +1 ability to get 2 red mana in our mana pool. Now, if we're able to copy that with Chandra's Regulator, it costs us 1 to get an additional 2. That's 4 mana in the mana pool that cost us 1 with the Regulator. It doesn't make a ton of sense to use something like Lithoform Engine because it costs us 2 to get 2 back. So that's where that doesn't really add up. But this isn't the only Chandra that can do that. Chandra Novice Pyromancer also has an ability to add 2 red. This is a minus, unfortunately, but I'll take extra mana where I can get it, no problem. So we're a deck full of Planeswalkers. Mila rewards us for attacking. Most opponents, if they're thinking clearly, won't just attack you and give you a ton of loyalty counters for a couple points of damage. I mean, even if they can take out one of your Planeswalkers, if you've got a few more that are just ticking up for the act of attacking, that doesn't seem like a good deal. So we're building in ways to encourage attacking, force it in some ways. To do so with actual Planeswalkers, we're running Gideon Jura, whose +2 ability says all attacking creatures until your next turn have to attack Gideon Jura. I don't know if he's going to survive that kind of onslaught, but that ensures that Mila's going to put a ton of counters on all your other Planeswalkers. Heck, you might be able to eat a couple of dumb creatures too if they have to send everybody in. And Rowan Kenrith, an expensive 6-mana Planeswalker, her +2 makes target player's creatures attack next turn if able. It's not quite as precision as Gideon Jura, but if it turns creatures sideways, they either have to attack you, and with Mila down give you a bunch of counters, or they have to attack an opponent, which is also fine by us. And we've got some of the classic creatures to do so. Fumiko the Lowblood, all the creatures have to attack, and Fumiko with that Bushido X for the number of attacking or blocking creatures makes it so you always have a profitable block. I don't mind that with Gideon Jura. Geode Rager, a recent creature that gives us landfall, goading all of the target player's creatures. Goading again doesn't help us in the sense that it won't attack into our Planeswalkers and give us counters via Mila, but if my opponents are attacking each other, I'm fine cleaning up the dust afterwards. Another interesting way to encourage attacking is Strixhaven Stadium. It's a simple 3-mana mana rock, but the extra text on this one is that every time you tap it, you get a point counter, and when you do combat damage to an opponent, you get another point counter. And if you hit 10 point counters during an attack, the player you hit to get that 10th point loses the game. Your opponents can remove point counters by attacking you, but again, that's how they're going to have to do it. They have to come at you to remove point counters, which means Mila's giving loyalty counters to your Planeswalkers. They can just sit there and watch you tick up the points, but like this is a ticking time bomb in a sense. They have to come at you a little bit. And with Mila, as I said, coming at you a little bit is kind of the worst. They have to almost go all in. And again, when your opponents can't really plan how the combat works, that's good for us. And a classic must attack is Trove of Temptation. Works nicely with Mila because all your opponents have to attack you or Planeswalkers you control. You're priced in. Life gets pretty tricky if they deal with your defenses, but you get an extra treasure every end step, so it's kind of built-in ramp. And even if you have Mila out, I have to remind you, if they target your creatures to get them out of the way, you're drawing cards from it, so it's not the end of the world. So how do we protect our Planeswalkers? We obviously don't want a bunch of opponents sending in a few creatures and just destroying them all. Planeswalkers tend to draw a lot of table hate, so that's why we're running cards like Comeuppance, which specifically protects you against damage from you or Planeswalkers you control. Redirects it back to a player. It could be a kill. It's not just protection, it might be a win con. Search the Premises. It's like maybe the 10th best white 4-mana enchantment, but nonetheless, when creatures attack you or Planeswalkers you control, you get to investigate. Boros decks don't always have a ton of mana lying around, but if we do, we can use that to draw extra cards, and they're things for Duretti to sack if we need to get back other artifacts, other things that went to the graveyard. And one of my favorite ways to punish attackers is Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. A lot of those ghostly prisons or propaganda type effects force your opponents to pay, and if they can't pay, they just can't attack. It kind of ties their hands on it. But with Kazul, they can attack no matter what. Then they have to choose, pay 3 mana or give me an ogre. At that point, they're committed to attacking. So it doesn't prevent anyone from attacking. And if they want to eat up all their turn just paying for your ogre tax, fine by me, or I get a ton of ogres. And the beauty is these ogres can immediately be used to block, chump, eat, trade, just to protect those other planeswalkers. Fantastic card in this deck. And I might add another legendary if that comes up. And I suspect it will. And the best way to make sure your planeswalkers stay alive? Make sure there's no creatures around to attack them. Blasphemous Act often costs 1 red and does 13 damage to all other creatures, but keeps your planeswalkers alive. Mila might go down for this, but I think that's a price I'm willing to pay to make sure everyone else is safe. Lava Brink Floodgates is a pretty cool piece of ramp too. It taps for 2, which is surprisingly powerful. It starts gathering doom counters if your opponents want to, but when you get enough doom counters, you lose the mana rock. So I wouldn't put this out too early, but if you put it out a little bit later, your opponents are realizing that all their creatures will take 6 damage if they do destroy your floodgates. Makes a lot of sense now, actually, when you think about it. The dam breaks and lava kills all the creatures, but only creatures. Planeswalkers will survive. And I haven't forgot about the Wanderer, making sure none of your creatures can actually take damage outside of combat. Not just your creatures, your permanents too. So let those floodgates die. Blasphemous Act the whole table. All your stuff's going to live if that's the case. Granted, the Wanderer can't protect you if you cast an Urza's Ruinous Blast. I mean, Mila lives, but a lot of your other non-legendaries will die. Kazul, fine. Mila, fine. Chandra's Regulator, fine. A lot of this deck is fine. Honor-Worn Shaku, ironically enough, not fine. But sometimes no matter how hard you try, people will kill your planeswalkers. So that's why we're running cards like Brought Back or Faith's Reward. These are the instants that bring permanents back from the graveyard if they were put there this turn. And they also have a use because planeswalkers sometimes put themselves in the graveyard. Maybe we don't do this as a reaction to enemy combat. Maybe we do this ourselves because we end up spending some loyalty, minusing a couple abilities. Planeswalkers go to the graveyard. We get to cast one of these instants and bring them back from the graveyard and use their abilities all over again. That's a second time in a turn. Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, even has a -2 that lets us double dip for cheap instants like Brought Back. And so here's where certain choices start to influence other choices a lot more strongly, because now we can run something like Sun Titan. I love getting back a land or two, maybe a mana rock, but I especially love getting back a cheap planeswalker. And Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, isn't the only planeswalker we have at 3. Sun Titan can also get us back Basri Ket and Tybalt, Rakish Instigator. Making a devil, having Tybalt die, Sun Titan bringing him back, making another devil. These are powerful turns. And we've hopefully got Mila putting counters on our planeswalkers, but we have other ways to do so as well. Ajani Steadfast has a minus ability that puts a +1/+1 counter on all your creatures and a loyalty counter on all your planeswalkers. This one can get out of hand, especially if we can copy it with a Lithoform engine or something like a Rings of Brighthearth. Heck, I'd be willing to spend 4 mana to double copy if I have both of those artifacts out. Of course, we're running Grateful Apparition to attack and get some proliferate triggers. And Heart of Kiran is a really interesting way to manipulate loyalty counters. You'll recall we can crew Heart of Kiran with a loyalty from a planeswalker. So this is a way to take someone like a Tybalt Rakish Instigator to maybe get rid of that one odd piece of loyalty and send him to the graveyard, making a devil, and get him back with something like Brought Back or Sun Titan. Ooh, and get a load of this neat move. Working on a neat move. I was doing a test game and I had no planeswalkers out, but I had Heart of Kiran. And I realized that if I could drop a creature with enough power to crew it, crew Heart of Kiran, which then counts as a legendary creature to allow me to cast Jaya's Immolating Inferno. You don't have to cast this for X being a very large number to do some significant damage to the table. And if you get this late with a lot of mana, maybe you've got some extra regulator triggers going on so you can get more mana from your various planeswalkers. This is potentially a kill. I love targeting my 3 opponents with this. And I have to give a special shout out to Sarkhan the Masterless. A win con in any Super Friends deck. Turning your whole team of planeswalkers into dragons and just flying over to finish off a player is something that is very satisfying. I also want to take a second to talk about Search for Glory. This is a 3-mana tutor. It's not demonic tutor because you can't get anything you want, but you can get a snow card, a legendary card, or a saga. We've got lots of legendary cards, and quite frankly, most of the things we may want to tutor for are legendary cards. Chandra's Regulator is a legendary artifact. Any Planeswalker obviously is legendary. Jaya's Immolating Inferno is a legendary sorcery, so we get to search for that with Search for Glory. We can run a couple of snow plains and mountains to make sure we have the ability to tutor up a land if we're really desperate for it. This card's very flexible. Almost demonic tutor for 1 more mana. I think this card's excellent. And it's about 25 cents. Price of a gumball. Oh, and one last card that really shines in this deck is a Reconstruct History. It's the sorcery from Strixhaven. It exiles when you cast it, but you get to return a planeswalker, an artifact, an enchantment, an instant, and a sorcery. That's everything we care about. It's what we call a 5-for-1, which is not too bad for a Boros deck. In a second, I'm going to do the budget report, and then I'll thank all the people who helped make this deck through our Discord. If you want to know how to get in on that kind of action, check out patreon.com/commandersbrew. Here's the budget report. I've already mentioned that the Chain Veil is up to $15, so that's a fairly easy cut because I don't think it's the best at what it does in this deck. Comeuppance, surprisingly, is like $12 by now. I mean, it was in a commander deck, so scarcity, I suppose, never reprinted, but it's a very powerful effect, and I guess if it's also a possible win con, that's why it's worth 12. I wouldn't love to cut it, but if you have to, that's a fine one to cut. Mangara's the Diplomat, someone I didn't mention already, but this is the white creature that lets you draw cards if people attack you with 2 or more creatures. Again, it's kind of perfect for this deck, and any white card that says draw on it tends to go up in price. I was surprised to find out that this is almost a $10 card. Maybe you can cut it. So if you want to make those cuts, this is deck comes in at under $150 on TCGMid, and you can definitely make it for cheaper. Special thanks to everyone who helped me make this deck on our Discord. Groove Chicken, Pips Don't Lie, Nosrak 2, Dylan PH, Mr. Big Bints, Slothbear55, Gee Pizza, Chiefy, Mondo, Knackle Booper, Papadillo, and Nickel Doodle. I really couldn't do without all the... Oh, hang on. Getting a phone call here. Hang on. Hello, Commander's Brew Headquarters, Sean speaking.
Hey, why wasn't I in the deck tech? Am I not in the deck?
I'm sorry. Who is this?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Who is this? What's going on? Am I still on the line with Sean?
No, you're not.
Who are you?
Don't worry yourself, Chandra. I'm here to tell you why you weren't in the deck tech.
Okay, so I obviously belong in a Super Friends deck with a ton of other Chandras on a Chandra's Regulator. I mean, look at me. 6 mana, can't be countered. I can give everyone an emblem that says at the beginning of their upkeep they take a damage. Or I can do 3 damage to each non-elemental creature. That protects planeswalkers. Or I can just do -X to target damage somebody in exile. What's so funny?
You didn't start in the deck. Sean thought you were too much, but I changed things a little bit.
That doesn't make sense. There's no room for me, but there is for Rowan and Kenrith.
We only need you for your emblem, Chandra. We don't care if you live or you die. Your pointed damage, your inability to be countered. You see, Chandra, we've got a new way to win since some recent unbannings happened. We only want 1 little copy of your tiny little emblem.
Stop.
It's true, Chandra. We're going to get one of your emblems online, then resolve a world fire, and end the game that way.
No, that's not what I'm for. No.
We're going to exile all permanents, all lands
Stop.
from all hands and graveyards, and each player's life
please.
total becomes 1. And then your measly little emblem will win us the game.
No.
Hello? Hello? Is anybody there? Well, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I do think this is a super fun deck. A super friendly deck, if you know what I mean. Come on back next week for another deck tech, and definitely nothing mysterious will be going on.